evening. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Hans Ulrich Obrist. I'm the artistic director of the Serpentine and also the curator, together with Juan Mata, of this forthcoming project, which is going to happen actually in 2 years from now. And we're so excited that actually this project can begin today with what we can call a chapter one or a prelude between Juan and Tino. And before I say anything else, I think we should all give Juan Mata and Tino Sehgal a very warm welcome! I wanted to thank John McGrath and of course the dream team of the Manchester International Festival, because none of it would have happened without them. And tell you a little bit, before I ask Tino and Juan the first questions, about the genesis of this project. Of course, our collaboration with MIF started at the very beginning. It's fascinating that in a way MIF really grew out of Peter Saville being the artistic director in Manchester. It's interesting that the city involved an artist, and I think other cities should follow that wonderful example, that in a way we bring artists into society, and out of that grew so many different things. And Alex Putz had invited us to do Tempo del Postino in 2006, a show with Philippe Pareno. We curated, and Tino was part of that. So that was kind of our first project in Manchester, and ever since there have been many experiments. And today we are launching this new experimental project between art and football, and it somehow, I mean, the theme has always been of interest. We curated something with Stefano Guerri in San Siro, in a football stadium many years ago, and we had many conversations over the years with John McGrath here, how one could in Manchester actually bring art and football together, but it was quite abstract, and what was lacking was a very concrete meeting, an encounter with an incredible visionary footballer who has an interest and a passion for art. And I'm going to tell you now in a minute how this happened, because it's a fascinating story. We have Josh Wildig here with us today, the filmmaker and film scriptwriter. And Josh and I work together on my Instagram account. It's a kind of a movement to save handwriting, so we post handwritten little notes and art projects, every day on my Instagram account. And Josh spotted about 3 years ago that Juan Mata started to follow me on Instagram and seemed to like art. So we sent Juan an Instagram message, a message on Instagram, and said, Juan, I was asking him, would you like to meet? Should we discuss art? And a wonderful message came back that you expressed really a passion for art, and we had a great first meeting here in Manchester at the Whitworth Museum. I invited at that meeting Juan to participate in the Do It project, to write. It's a kind of a project with instructions and recipes, and Juan wrote this great instruction. We met again at the festival 2 years ago when Lem Sisse and I curated this show about art and poetry, and many of you might have seen that because we had posters all over the city. And it was kind of about this encounter, where artists also are poets, and poets also make visual art. And it was actually really during that meeting with Josh and John and Juan and myself that we came to this idea that we could do a show to bring artists and footballers together in fascinating new constellations. And it's then really through the conversations with Josh and Juan that this idea of the Trequartista came in a way. We're going to discuss that also today. Became central in the discussion, so and that will be the topic of the exhibition in 2 years. And of course, Tino entered this conversation early on because we've known each other for 20 years, and football was always a topic in our conversations. And I knew of Tino's passion for football, so when we met Juan, I immediately rang Tino, and I said, it's an amazing encounter. Tino was very impressed by Juan's Do It instruction, so we connected them, and they started to have this wonderful dialogue. And what you see here at the Football Museum, we of course also thank the museum here very much for the collaboration. It's been a wonderful dialogue, and what you see here is really the outcome of many months of dialogue. And Tino visited Juan in Turkey. You're going to hear about all of that in the conversation. But I wanted to begin now with my first question to you both, which is a rather general question. I really wanted to ask Juan, what was your first experience of art?
Well, first of all, thank you for the introduction. It's difficult to add something to that. I would just say that maybe some other persons here are today together thanks to Instagram also, so So I think it's nowadays the way that so many people communicate. I'm so happy to be here in Manchester. It's my home. I see so many friends, family, people that I love, people that make me feel so welcome in this town. So for me, it's very natural that we are starting this exhibition, this project here in the Manchester International Festival. Coming back to your question, I think it was in London. I was playing for Chelsea, I was living in London, and of course there's a lot of things to do in London, and there are so many galleries and museums. And we used to take our days off to try to get to know the city, and some of the places and the buildings, and some of them they were galleries and museums. So I started to get curious about many artists, what they do, how they communicate with people in many different ways. And since then, when I moved to Manchester, you mentioned before, the Whitworth Gallery is a great building with great exhibitions that we used to go a lot. And since then, I started to read, I started to watch documentaries to try to educate myself in the matter. I'm just starting, I'm a beginner, but having people like you around is helping me a lot.
Thank you so much. And Tino, what was your first experience with football?
Oh, that's I mean, I grew up in a time where there was no internet, and you went out on the street, you rang the doorbell of your friends, and then we lived on a kind of slope, like the street was sloped, and then there was a playground, and I think that's what we did all day, like most kids, like we played. The goal was always the bench, and I think it's before my memories. I think there's photos of me in a garden. I lived for 3 years, my first 3 years in outskirts of London. I think there's photos of me with the gardener and a ball.
You were a goalie, no?
Later I was a goalie, yeah. But at 2, I don't think. No, nobody's a goalie. Everybody's one now. But yeah, they said about, my parents always said, yeah, he has an eye for the ball. But later I did then skateboarding.
Thank you. And maybe before we talk about the piece here, this entry, the piece on which you collaborated, there's maybe another kind of introductory question. That's really this discussion about the Trequartista, because it's interesting because we somehow were, of course, looking for something which could bring together football and art, and in a way, as I said, we kind of met through this Instagram project of mine, which is basically about saving handwriting, and it came out of this idea, that in this digital age, we use handwriting less, so we sort of every day celebrate handwriting, and it's really in these conversations then out of saving handwriting. There's at the moment Josh said, should we save the Trequartista? And you, of course, told us so many amazing things during that first meeting at the Whitworth Museum about the Trequartista and why the kind of Trequartista is in danger maybe now. Can you tell us a little bit? And maybe it's interesting also to just define what is a Trequartista.
Yeah, Trequartista is a position. It's what we know now as number 10 or creative midfielder, and it used to be very relevant in Italy and Spain in the 80s and 90s. And I used to love Trequartistas. That's why I fell in love with the game, because my dad used to play football and he had a lot of quality, but also I remember Trequartista players, this number 10 that can get great on the pitch. They can decide the game with a control or a pass. And I love watching them play. So when Josh mentioned Save the Trequartista and naming the exhibition like this, I thought it was perfect because, like you say, I think football is evolving, it's changing, it's adapting to the new technologies and all the data that we have. And in a way, the game is becoming quicker of motion, but I really value the speed of thought. And for me, the Trequartistas in the 80s and 90s, maybe they were not so quick when they move or they pass the ball, but they were very quick at thinking. And I really admire that from a football player. So that's why I think nowadays, football players, especially from younger generations, probably are more coached. So they're more prone to play in a certain system, and they're, of course, with more resources physically, nutrition. We have a lot of very positive things that are helping to improve the game. But in that sense, we are forgetting a little bit about the essence of the game for me, which is improvisation, freedom on the pitch, and creativity. That's why we are doing this exhibition, and that's why Josh's name is perfect for it. And
that's why it connects, of course, to art. Can you give us maybe one or two examples of your favorite Trequartistas from history,
For example, when I think about Eric Cantona, which many persons here will love, he wasn't a Trequartista as per se in the position, but he was everything on the pitch, and he was kind of a genius, on and off the pitch, with his personality, his charisma, and for me, players like him, players later down the line like Zinedine Zidane, For example, the way he plays football. Dennis Bergkamp used to play for Arsenal, great Dutch player. All these players that they make things look easy, and they're very difficult to do, but they made them look easy, and for me that's genius from them.
Thank you, Juan. And Tino, what's your take on the Trequartista?
I mean, obviously I don't know as much about football as somebody who's professional in that field, but I had I think my interests, I mean, I had a moment as a child, and then I had a longer gap, and then one of the things that spiked my interest, that I saw it as a kind of that the developments in football also parallel to the developments in society, and I mainly grew up in Germany, and so the idea about the Germans was always the German football team, they're these kind of craftspeople, workers, and physical and disciplined, and that was somehow the image of Germany, also the image in Germany. And then somehow, when I started watching again, maybe 2006 or something, 2002 was still like that, the German team, with Oliver Kahn and these kind of people, and somehow they made it into the final, but you didn't really know how. And then from 2006, somehow this new generation came, and I realized a lot of them, if you had to put them, is it Schweinsteiger or Özil, or a lot of them were kind of more creative, maybe also a little bit more feminine in their whole kind of performance of self. And I started realizing, oh wait, there's before it was the cliche was there's the workers, and then there's one kind of playmaker, director, creative artist, And I became actually interested in the opposite of what you and Josh, what I understand from you and Josh is that I felt everybody had to be a little bit like an artist, or more and more people were very technically very good players, or from a kind of semi-distance, if I see the youth system, the players which make it to the top, they're playing more central midfield, and then as higher they get put somewhere else on the pitch. It's probably not true all the time, but you have to be very, if you're a central defender, you're still you have to understand the game. You cannot just have a body and put your body in. So for me, in sociology, let's say someone who really follows sociology, enjoys sociology, I mean, we have had the rise of the creative class, the rise of the creative economy, and I even feel it in my own daily life. When I started as an artist more than 20 years ago, you were kind of the exception. Oh, you're doing something a creative job. Oh wow, whereas the standard was the standard job was an uncreative job. But I would say a lot of jobs today have a creative aspect, and creativity, in economic terms, you can say creativity has become a production factor, maybe one of the biggest, and also kind of what's the word, renewable production factor, infinite production factor, and so for me, I had a little bit a different take than you guys, that I thought, oh yeah, more and more of these kind of creative people are filling the spaces, and so for me, and I like this idea that everybody has to do everything. I also, when I started looking at football again, I saw this transition of Ribéry. Ribéry, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not really, don't really know fully what I'm talking about. But what I understood is that at the time, 2012, Ribéry was a classic kind of creative player, no? But then Bayern won the Champions League because the coach at the time, Heinkes, he managed to tell Ribéry, also Robben, you have to defend. And that was the key. You have to also be a worker. You cannot just be. And this to me was I was also interested, also in my work, how can you bring all the modalities of life together rather than just focus on one specialized modality.
And this is really a great transition into this entry. It's an entry into this entry, so as to say. The title of the work you're going to see here, or some of you might have already experienced it, is this entry. And I thought before we discuss it with you both, and also the way you collaborated with Tino, I thought it would be interesting that you could maybe explain a little bit the sort of principle of your work, also for those of you here who are not familiar with your work, because obviously it's not a performance, because a performance has a specific time. It's an appointment. With Tino's work, it's never an appointment in that sense, from 6 to 7. Or, this talk, for example, tonight, is in a way more a performance than the piece, because it's an appointment, right? It's basically a talk for an hour, and you all came, and we all gather here for an hour. But with Tino's pieces, it's never the case that it's an appointment, it's opening hours. So it sounds like when you go to a museum and you see the sculptures, and then the only difference is that the sculptures, will go home once, the museum closes. That means it's opening hours. It's there from the morning to the evening. And you call these works constructed situations. It's something you invented early on in your work. Could you maybe explain that a little bit, in the way you bring through these constructed situations, the human body together with voice? Of course, there's a lot of interaction, and there are always also instructions. And the instructions are never really written, but they're oral.
I think I came from a very uncultural background, but I was somehow impressed by these places which looked like temples, like secular temples, which were called museums. But I didn't feel like I really fully related to them. And I came more from the sustainability movement at that time, and I thought, what are these spaces which are somehow have such a big architectural effort? A society always has kind of central buildings which have the highest architectural effort, which would be like a cathedral or a temple. Mostly these spaces say a lot about the society, what are its beliefs. And in our society, like in many cities in Western countries, the newer buildings which had a strong architectural effort, or also lots of resource poured into them, are museums. And then I thought, what is this place, kind of unusual place in the history of mankind, that if you come in, let's say if this were a museum, which kind of is and isn't, but if this is a museum room, and I'm coming into the room, I would be like, no, so that's very unusual, because normally in any other culture we would be like, hi, so in a museum, what was interesting to me in the beginning was why do we have a ritual or a format or an institution, whatever you want to call it, where when you come into a room, an object is more important than a human being? Because there is mostly a guard. And so then I thought that says something about, let's say, our culture in the West, 19th and 20th century, where somehow there was the belief the more we kind of transform the natural resources of our earth into products, the more products we have, the happier we will be. And that didn't seem a coincidence, and that we build these kind of temple-like spaces where we kind of look at objects. So that's kind of where my work started. I think, let's come out telling, and why don't we shift that around? So my first works that you saw and supported at the time or invited were where the museum guard did something. The museum guard would sing, or the museum guard would dance. And I remember my first solo show in 2004 in Holland. Then my first solo show in Holland, then little kids would go up to the next museum guard. I think I had 4 works, but of course there were more museum guards in the museum. They would go up to little kids. They would go up to the museum guard and say so what do you do? And it was also interesting how quickly you can shift this relation, how unstable it is that objects as a standalone thing. Obviously, objects are very important in our lives, but as a standalone kind of conveyor of meaning have such a high importance. That was somehow my starting point. That's why then I did it also. I tried to show works which was shown exactly like installations or sculptures and paintings, from 10 to 6, but it was live human interaction.
And maybe that is the transition then into this new piece, this entry, because it would be great to hear from both of you how you collaborated, and maybe, Tino, you begin a little bit, because you had already this idea for this piece when we invited you, but then the piece completely evolved in the dialogue with Juan, and the two of you met actually in Turkey, in the Galatasaray training facility, and in a way, a lot of what you see here, what you all see here today, was developed there during these rehearsals. Can you both talk a little bit about, maybe Tino, you can talk a little bit about the beginning, what were your ideas of this entry, because it's not only football, it's a coming together a fusion in a way of different aspects, and then maybe Juan, we can hear from you how these sessions were in Turkey and how you collaborated with Tino. And,
Sure.
Yeah.
And my guess that most people didn't see it today, no?
Who has seen it?
Yeah, not so many people, yeah.
Yeah.
Steve. Hey, Steve.
But you have time to
They
come
will be
to
back.
see
They will be back.
to
Yeah,
see
it
it
runs from
tomorrow, and then it's here, for a week, and then you can see it afterwards also at the Whitworth, because we found it's interesting that it has two different iterations, because it's a piece which is, both about football and about art. We wanted it to be in the context of football and in the context of art. So that's why it's a week in the Football Museum, and then a week in the Whitworth.
Yeah, so for those of you, which is the majority here, you can imagine it like a quartet. In this room, no chairs here, and some of the people doing it are here, and one of them plays the violin, the other one dances, then the third one does kind of artistic cycling, which is a sport maybe most of you don't know, which people do tricks with a bike that looks like a normal bike, and then there's a ball player, and there's like a kind of dance quartet between these four movement specialists, so 3 movement specialists and 1 movement generalist. As a choreographer, because that's like largely my craft background, I became interested in these kind of micro movements or very precise movements that sports people have, and to think like of them as dancers and how it could then also as a choreographer. So it's like a kind of 1 hour worth of like choreographic material of like kind of duets, quartets between these 4 different people. Yeah, that's about what I want to say. But I hope you can come at some point. It's for free here, and the Whitworth is for free too. Hey ho UK, yeah.
Important. Free admission in museums is something we deeply believe in. We also have at the Sabaton in London. So Juan, can you tell us about how you entered this entry and how it was, your experience? I mean, we saw you today performing the piece, which is amazing. Congratulations. And we saw also, of course, the dancers, the violinists, the cyclists, the ball players. Many of them are here, and I just want to congratulate you all, because it's fabulous what you did.
Yes. I think I should start with your kind visit to Turkey and the time we spent together with you and Aline. Tino's son is here. He plays football. He's a little injured at the time, but he plays very good, and he helped a lot in the brainstorming and rehearsal of the piece. It was captivating for me. It's fascinating to step a little bit into a different world, which I admire and respect so much. I was speaking with the team before, and Tino was saying it's quite different and similar at the same time from a game of football. It's very subtle, it's very precise, it's very silent. And I think it's very important from the performers, and it's very difficult to do. They feed energy to the visitors. In football, we get the energy from the fans that come to the stadium. And that's probably easier, because you get it from external resource, and then you can run and move, and you're always in the move.
Interesting.
For me to understand how they can produce such energy and connection and captivate the public like they did. I mean, yesterday I was really shocked positively with what I saw. We only rehearsed the Maradona piece and all that has to do with the football, but everything in the performance, the bicycle, the violin, the movement, the coordination between them, is also a little bit of team play. And I think you can bring that into football. I cannot win a game alone. They cannot perform alone. They can, most of them, and they do very well. But I think it works better when they are together and they have connection. So my journey of learning what is similar and what is different in order to try to learn and grow, it's fascinating. So I'm learning a lot. I'm enjoying a lot. I'm captivated by what they do, and I have so much respect, because I tried a little bit today, and I was nervous because I'm not used to this, but I love the energy that you can create with somebody else that come into a room, and thanks to a movement and a connection with your eyes, you can interact without speaking, and that's for me very magical.
No, I love that idea that basically it's about giving energy in a way to the viewer. And,
That's how I felt when I was watching them yesterday and today.
Yeah.
And it was natural for me to compare it with what I feel in a stadium. I mean, playing at Old Trafford every 2 weeks with 75,000 people, it's fantastic, but everything goes so quick that you don't really have time to think. Here is the opposite, which is you have so much time to actually control yourself, make yourself look passionate and really into the work, so you can really connect with the viewer. And for me, of course, I've been playing football for a long time, but for me, that's more difficult than playing football, and that's what interests me, to actually explore in this experiment that we are doing the similarities and the differences between your world and my world, and collaborate and work together.
And can you maybe tell us more, particularly for those of you, I think the majority will see the piece only tomorrow and the next couple of days, haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the Maradona piece?
Yeah.
And also, I mean, the movements which we saw this afternoon, they're highly complex. They're really difficult. And you told me at the end of the performance that you you were almost more nervous than before a game.
Depending which game.
Yeah.
But yes, it is, in a way, it's very different, because all the movement that, for example, the performers that use the ball, the artists that use the ball in this piece, they use it in such a subtle way. They make equilibrium with the ball, they dance with the ball. A ball is the continuation of their bodies in a very smooth way. And so to translate my experience on a football pitch, which is everything 100%, into that slowness is not easy. But I've tried to give my impressions with some things that we practice in Turkey with Nalin, about controlling the ball, moving with the ball, some things that he wanted to also add into the piece. So it's very difficult to do. It's very difficult for myself as a professional football player. I think maybe it's a bit difficult for them to play football in a game, actually. The people that are used to do these kind of things in a more static way. But I really respect them, and I mean, it's quite difficult to do.
Another thing which was fascinating today is I then asked you, because of course you said it depends on which game, and I have also been football games,
Yeah.
where there's a lot of tension or a lot of pressure in a way. And it's actually one of the most exciting games was when you won the Champions League, and that was actually when Tino was doing his incredible piece in Documenta. And we found out, Tino, that you were, before ever having met Juan, watching Juan in that game. Can we talk about that game? It was a very special game, no?
He's not happy about that game.
No?
No, but it's funny because at the time, I mean, I think it's for all of us. I mean, I think when you get older, I mean, I think that this is what I sense with Juan, but also with myself, and which is why we're here. I mean, I feel like I don't know Manchester and I don't know you, but it feels like somehow people from different backgrounds, no? And I think that's something that you've been working on, I've been working on, Hans Ulrich, like how do we bring in society different subspheres or different corners of society, how do we bring them together in a room, you know? And I think football does that in a good way, but then there's also like the kind of people who are interested in like kind of, I don't know what to call it, like serious culture, they don't go there also, you know, like, and how can one bridge these kind of worlds? And I think this is something that when you get a little bit older and you have the privilege of doing something, you know, for a long time, and then of course you get also curious, you know, what is the offbeat, what is the pause from that, no? And I sense that with you also. I mean, for me, like, when I look at football, for me it's no pressure or no routine, or there's nothing in it. I'm just like pure relaxation, you know, which is like for you for art.
Yeah, it's not for football, definitely.
You know, and so there's always this effort, you know, to, I mean, I think if you do one profession, to balance a little bit. Everybody has that apart from Hans Ulrich, maybe, you know, and I see Josh's reaction, and so. I mean, that happens on, let's say, more on a psychological level, and that I sense with you and me, you know, like, but just inverse,
crossing,
inverse, you know, like you have an excitement for art, which I find, you know, like endearing, but difficult to. No, but it refreshes me, your excitement for art. Let's put it like that, and but I think that this kind of building kind of spaces in society where people from different subspheres meet, that's, I think, a political question which is really relevant. Because we used to, in like the democracies that were created in, like, say, 200-300 years ago, they had as a necessary precondition a public sphere. Public sphere meaning, like, can be from a cafe to, like, 3 television channels, 7 newspapers or something, where everybody, no matter what your political affiliation or value set was, would discuss, be part of a common conversation. And since the internet, now we have this more like echo chambers, bubbles. And we see that that can be quite difficult for democracies to deal with that, because people are like, no, I'm like talking to the people who have the same, or I'm listening to the media which has the same opinion as me, and it kind of reinforces, and I cannot even talk to you anymore. No? At the same time, I don't want to talk bad about social media, because without social media we wouldn't even be sitting here. So, but I think that's a little bit like, for me, what is interesting in our common conversation, what is interesting about tonight, if it then works, if it's interesting to hear somebody like me talk, if you actually want to hear Juan talk, I don't know. Like, I don't know if it works. Maybe we should then also, you can't overdo it or something. I don't know.
I think it's going well. I'm enjoying it.
It's an interesting point, because of course what you refer to is, is the filter bubble, and that, in a way, rather than, technology, we can use technology, hopefully, in order to kind of actually build bridges and go beyond separation. Very often, unfortunately today, it's the opposite. It polarizes, it leads to separation. I mean, Etelatnan has this beautiful quote: "The world needs togetherness, not separation; love, not suspicion; a common future, not isolation." It's kind of my favorite quote from her. She's this amazing poet and artist from Lebanon, and she brought in her work together, poetry, painting, art, urbanism. Yeah, almost like it all came together in the work. And I think this togetherness, as Tino said, bringing spheres together is very important today for society. And exhibitions are a great possibility to do so. We did it recently with Jakob Knudsinsen and K-pop, with BTS, at the Serpentine. We did it with video games, with Fortnite and the Cute. And we reached 150 million people through that in a quite short time. And so that all is kind of, I think, urgent. And in this piece, it's kind of structurally embedded. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit more. I mean, you touched upon it, but I wanted to go a little bit more into depth with that, because there is a kind of a commonality between these different experts of movement, right? Because, of course, you're a great expert, and you meet other great experts in this piece through Tino. As Tino said, there are, dance experts, violin experts, cycling experts, and ball playing experts. And in a way we can experience, and that's at least how I felt this afternoon, we can, and hopefully you will make this experience tomorrow, that we can feel a commonality, between these different expertises. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about that experience and this interconnectivity, which we all agree upon is needed? Tino, you explained it for society, but which I think is structurally embedded in the piece, maybe?
I think personally, I grew up with the ball, my feet, with the ball around, playing with my sister, with my family. So my movement with the ball, my coordination with the ball, is kind of innate since I was born. I was not thinking about hitting the ball with the right, with the left, controlling it in a certain way. It's a bit more natural own academy towards my relationship with the ball and the way I treat the ball when I'm on the pitch or in training or something like that. So it's something that I've been doing for many years, and it's a kind of way of how I communicate best. I can speak, I can talk, I can try my best, but I think when I'm on the football pitch, playing and communicating with my teammates, with movements and coordinations and little tricks, little football things that we do, and with the ball connecting us all, is just a very good experience, and that you appreciate much more as long as you get older, and you try to understand that also, like you say, so many people from different countries are playing in the same team, and it's something that brings people together with movement, coordination, and a common denominator, which is a ball. I think that is something that interests you, and that's why you brought it into the piece. And all those innate or natural movements I think he has the ability, maybe I don't actually thinking about it, but he has the ability, you have the ability, so many people have the ability to see it from a different perspective and analyze it in a way that I would never think of. So when we were in Turkey and I was doing some of my controls and movements and you were saying, stop there. Stop there and do this and do that. And I was doing it in my own way, but you were seeing things that I never thought about this movement or this pass or this control. So I think it's very enriching for the whole project to actually have different perspectives, which they can make a piece more connected between different worlds, different sectors, different eyes. And in my view, they come up together very nicely.
Thank you. Tino, anything else you want to add to this?
I mean, what about this togetherness? And like maybe I want to ask a question, like a kind of quiz question, because like England is the place of quizzes. Since when does sport exist? Does anybody have an idea? I don't know the exact answer, but since when does sport exist?
Sport, I mean, I'm replying that. It's very interesting. Sport as a form of physical activity, sport as a form of game, because at the end of the day, sport is a game with all the people. Individual sport, collective, so I think it's...
But the idea of sport in general, like that people...
Industrial revolution.
Yeah. Maybe when you're a bit younger, yeah? Would you have thought that? Who would have thought that sport exists forever? Yeah, those are the courageous ones, yeah. I think I more feel like sport is a relatively new thing. Like, I mean, what they would have in Greece, for example, would be competitions. You know, you would have the, you know, like they would say, okay, now we meet this, you know, once a year and we see who is the fastest runner of us, you know, in our city. But those people were not running, maybe they were running for whatever their job was, but like sport is a quite new invention, you know, like which comes probably, like you say, with Industrial Revolution. I didn't look into it too much, so I'm like...
Olympic Games come to my mind.
Yeah, like the Olympic Games,
yeah.
like they're relatively new, like 19th century. So it comes from a time when people also are doing less manual labor, but it's also an idea, and I think this is a very interesting idea, and like philosophers like Sloterdijk have written about this, and you should read like a little bit maybe, and me too, you know, like that, in a way, this togetherness, like, it's a similar idea like Adam Smith had with the market, because it's like, okay, there are certain energies in humans, you know, like, for example, like, I'm jealous, or I'm against, or I want to fight you, I want to, you know, and these things can turn really sour, you know, like people can get killed over these kind of emotions. And sport is a way of civilizing these. It's a civilizing ritual where, this, for example, I find very touching also with the new generations of players, you know, like, and, but it's in sport in general, like there's always like at the beginning, you shake hands, you agree to, like it's a very civilized side of agon, you know, of a, how do you say this in English, like, again, like competitive or counter energies, like, agonale Energie, wie sagt man das auf Deutsch? Anyway, like the agon of life, you know, it gets put into a form and thereby gets civilized, so it has a place, it can, like venting, it can get vented, but at the end of the day, they shake hands again, you know? And I mean, there's been instances when it kind of goes overboard, but it's very, very, very rare. And where it actually goes into real violence. So I think that also, let's say, the field that we come from, like Hans Ulrich, like you and me, like I think there was always like a little bit of disdain for the sports world, you know, because it dealt with like energies which were like, ooh, you know. But I think in the end, it's an important side in society. Yes, people actually come together, but also it produces togetherness beyond beyond division. You know, like at the end, I like to watch like football matches at the end. They all know each other. I mean, you're part of like one big club, the professional football club in a way, and you play 1 year with this guy and the next year with that guy. And I was watching, I don't know, I zapped probably on YouTube through like some older English pundits, is what you call them. And then they were like unhappy that the new generation was like, you know, hugging or even shaking hands, But that's this civilizing aspect which has gone even further now, but it's always there. There's always like you exchange the little flag, you shake hands, you know, like at the beginning of the game, it's all in a kind of set of rules, you know, where nobody gets really hurt, you know, but you let it out. So this kind of togetherness, I think is very important for modern societies, you know, and it's underappreciated in like theoretical discourse or also in the art world, if that still exists.
Yeah, it leads us back to the quote of Eitel, no? Very much so. About needs togetherness, not separation. Love, not suspicion. A conflict, not isolation. I think it's a good moment to open it up for questions you might have. And maybe I ask a last question so that you have time to think about the question you're going to ask. Juan and Tino, I wanted to ask you about the future, you know, and Rainer Maria Rilke wrote this in the book, which is an advice to a young poet. So I was kind of wondering what you would advise a young footballer or a young artist. And also, particularly in relation to the Trequartista thing, you know, to the topic of the Trequartista, I'm also like curious if you see any, you know, young emerging Trequartistas.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, I mean, if I had to speak with myself, with my little self, when I was 5, 6, 10 years old and I started this dream of becoming a professional football player, I think it's very important to, you know, not everything is good in your professional career. You can have many years where everything seems like it's fantastic, you're winning trophies, you're playing, you're feeling that you're evolving, but there is a certain time that you're going to play less, that you're going to get injuries, unfortunately, for certain components that are negative, and I think it's important to know that and just keep going through. Like, you need to be resilient and you need to keep believing in what you can bring to a team on and off the pitch, because I really believe what you can give your teammates even when you don't play. So I think it's that, and it's also, I will tell myself to keep the enthusiasm, to keep the passion for the game. When you're doing something for many years, and I think we spoke about this before, and I agree with you, it's difficult to maintain the passion and the enthusiasm all the time with the same intensity. So I remind myself sometimes about who I was when I was 6, 7 years old, and I used to play football for, you know, just to have freedom, to play with friends, and I could play for 8 hours without thinking about anything else. I was flowing on the game. Whenever I have a bad moment, or I'm not playing so much, or I have an injury, I try to remind myself of that. And that gives me more energy to keep playing, which is what I want to do, and what I hopefully can do for the next couple of years, because I still enjoy waking up every day and going to training, going to relate myself with the ball. So I will say that to myself. There are many good players right now, and of course, if we talk about the best players in the world, and I know you're a big fan of him, we can talk about Kylian Mbappé and his way of playing. We can speak about Erling Haaland and the goals that he scored. But as you say, there are some other players that they still have the Trequartista aspect. And I have an example. It's not a great example because he's a Man City player, but I appreciate his football. I think Phil Foden is a young player, he's from a younger generation, but his quality and the way he believes in himself on the game, and the way he changed, for example, the Champions League game, which I was there watching, it was refreshing to see for a young player to have this talent, to have this magic in a way. So he's a good example of that. We have Pedri in Spain. He's a fantastic player. He plays for Barcelona, and I feel happy when I watch him play. Nowadays I watch football because I feel better when I see certain players play, honestly. And so I watch the game and analyze the game tactically, and I want Real Oviedo, which is my home team, to win. But when I see a player playing good and the manager takes him off, I change. Because he was making me feel happy, and then it's like, why you change him? And it happened to me so many times. Why you change me? But anyway, that's the way I analyze football now.
Thank you, Juan. Tino?
But can you remind me of the question? What was it?
Yeah, in a way, the advice to, in your case, the advice to a young artist, and you know, if you see any young Trequartistas, maybe also in art.
I mean, two thoughts come to mind, and then you have to tell me if I speak too long, because we want to open it up and people want to get maybe away from this astroturf. But like, I remember a conversation we had maybe 10 years ago. I remember exactly where I was, like in my old apartment, looking out the window, and you said to me, and you're like somebody who professionally researches, you're like a scout, no? Like, and maybe the biggest scout that there is, and you go around like with unstoppable energy looking at young artists. Sometimes I join you and I think, oh my God, you know, but like, you said, you think that the most interesting younger creative people, they're now going into kind of this, social entrepreneurship. Remember you said that, like maybe 10 years ago. And I was a little bit shocked, but over the years the thoughts stayed with me. And I think that, like I said at the beginning, I don't know if it still works really fully nowadays to be like departmentalized like that, you know, like to just be a person who focuses on creativity. You know, like I think, like I said earlier, like a lot of professions which have an application, because the idea of the artist always comes with the idea of autonomy, which means like if someone doesn't really have an application, it's kind of like a thought model, like a concrete materialized thought model. And that can, so I think there's a lot of professions, like a friend of mine, he teaches at the Art Academy in Munich, and Olaf Nicolai, and he said, like, I said, I never wanted to teach at the Art Academy because I'm not so, anyway, cut that short, but, and he said, then he sometimes talks with them, and he says, but, you know, he tries to steer them away from art, and one is now doing this amazing whiskey or something in this creative way, you know, and I think there's a lot of value in that, like in our old system, like old value system that you and me grew up with, yeah? Maybe not a lot of you who live in England, and you always had like, England to me always seemed to like have a lesser valuing of this like high art culture than like say France, for example. I think that traditionally we would value, like at least Germany, France, would value this high culture stuff higher, but which means like autonomous stuff that doesn't have an applied use. But I think that there's a lot of creativity which can go into real aspects of life, you know, like this Margaret Mead text that we're both reading since 10 years, which is just 2 pages, but called Art and Reality, which is a critique of the Western idea of art. And then the other thing I would say, like to a young artist, I would say like, well, it's tough, you know, like it's a much more competitive field than any field, you know, because you're competing against the last 500 years, you know. It's like as if you would still be on the pitch with Zidane, Pelé, you know, and then the way that the art has developed, I mean, this is a little bit like maybe shop talk, and so not so interesting for you, but like art has developed much more. I mean, people in the UK or in Germany and France don't necessarily see it like that, but I'm convinced it's going to be like that. It's very difficult to make a piece of art which is somehow sticking on the wall. You know, so it has to be somehow an installation. The installation has to be time-based. It has to have somehow elements that change over time, that are also varied, that they're not fixed. All of these criteria make it like similar to contemporary society, because those are criteria of society. So you have to control a whole situation. That doesn't mean you have to do a work with live people, but you have to control the entire situation. Like I always think of like Pierre Wieg's 2017 Münster project, which was like basically he took a derelict ice skating rink and totally took it apart, literally took the ice skating rink apart, like dug into it, opened the thing, and made it into like a total work of art. And if you think of that work, I mean, it's a very good work of art, but how much decades of experience, how much resources also does it take to do something like that? Very difficult for a young person to do something on that level. And so I think I would,
It's a great moment to open it. Thank you so much, Tino. It's a great moment to open it up, I think. I know Narlene has a question. And I see also a question here in the very back. Yeah. But let's start with Narlene here in the second row. And then we have a question in the very back. Yeah. On the left-hand side in the very back, if you can have then the second microphone. Yeah. But Narlene?
So Tino, you mentioned earlier that a Trequartista is a player that is often in touch with their feminine side. And now, Juan, my question is to you, is that in what way would a player benefit from being in touch with their feminine side, and why?
Well, I think what you mentioned is players that behave in a way or move in a way which is maybe more towards their sensibility side. And I think to have sensibility in life, it's good, it's positive. I think in football, especially the player that he mentioned, for example, Mesut Ozil, right, is one of the players that now he's retired unfortunately, but I used to watch him play and I used to enjoy a lot. And him, Christian Eriksen, which is now at Manchester United, Bruno, so many players that I played against and with that fit the profile of what I think your dad was trying to say. It can benefit in the way that you can understand the game better. I think these kind of players, they have a higher sensibility for the game, higher sensibility of the relation with the ball, and a higher understanding of decision making. I always say that these kind of players, the Trequartista players, they do with the ball what the game asks. And that's not easy to spot, but when I see a player that when he has to make a pass, makes the right pass at the right moment, in the right foot of your teammate, that's for me sensibility. And I think those players have that side of their being more developed because they are capable of first seeing that, second producing it, and third analyzing it to bring it to our own game.
Thank you. We've got a question here. Do we have the microphone?
Hello.
Thank you.
I've been a theatre producer for about 17, 18 years, but I've been a Man United fan my whole life. So 37, nearly 38 years, and a massive football fan. And I guess I've always felt like football is the most beautiful art form and the most beautiful performance. And, you know, Old Trafford, we call it the theatre of dreams. It was my first theatre I ever went to as a kid. So I guess my question is, do we, for all of you, I guess, do we not see football as performance and as art already?
I do. I do, and that's why we came together, because I kind of think there is an existing connection already in the perception that you have from a football player, from a football team. Sometimes the way that team plays sometimes is like an orchestra. It's coordination, it's everything has the role, everyone has the role, and it's perfectly timed. And so for me, there is a clear connection about it. That's why I'm here, and we started this project. I don't know how you see it. But that's
I agree with you. No, that's the short answer. Yeah.
There's also a really long history, you know. I was reading this morning again the magazine Bernard Comment edited of Art Press, the French art magazine Art Press, did a special issue on the relationship between art and football. He's a Swiss-French novelist, and it's like super interesting to just see that, you know, Marguerite Duras, you know, wrote amazing literature on football, or the French writer, she wrote this great text, or that the Iranian filmmaker Abbas Kiarostami, you know, did one of the most beautiful films around football called The Passenger from '74. And there's an amazing history which brings the two things together in a way, which is obviously also something, you know, we'll explore in 2 years in this project. And there is a whole, Albert Camus, besides also Marguerite Duras, you know, of course, wrote a lot on football. And so I would say that in a way, the bridge has always existed. You find a whole history of it. I mean, that's at least what that issue made it very clear. We can take one more question, 2 more questions. We have 2 questions here. So these are the last 2 questions. One is in the 3rd row and one in the 4th row.
Thanks. Big fan of Tino already, but also read. It was interesting when you said about 75,000 people, because I went to see, as a means of relaxation, I invited my wife to come and watch a United game at Old Trafford. And she got really angry with me because she was just finishing her PhD dissertation, 75,000 words. And I said, imagine if we just gave everybody just gave us a word in the stadium, and then I hand it in as a dissertation. And she went absolutely mad at me because it was kind of too much. But it was just this thing about, I was questioning her expertise in her subject. But I do wonder about art as the sort of, you talk about expertise of football, but also art for mass art, or kind of, what 75,000 people can do to make an artwork. And I wondered whether that interested you as much as sort of the expertise of a footballer or a dancer or a performer or non-performer.
And it goes in a similar direction, like the way I understand what you said. Like, yeah, it's a whole kind of energetic, also ritual. I mean, like people are like, and I find it interesting the way Juan said how he receives this energy, but I would be more, my first thought would be like the energy that is created, and like also like as a critique of, let's say, the Western serious culture formats, you know, which are often like here, like you're sitting, and now after you've gone to this event, you know, you've been sitting for an hour. That does something with your body. Well, if you're at, I've never been to Old Trafford, but I imagine like lots of people are standing, people are singing, people are shouting, you know. And when I go to my younger son's volleyball game, like I feel it in my body, like we're all the time singing and cheering, you know, all these, and it's a different. It gives the kind of beholder, you know, like in art we say viewer, but really like there's degrees of activity and degrees of passivity, you know. And what I like about the whole, let's say, sports rituals, and especially football, which is the biggest one, is like how it allows a kind of collective, energetic, I don't want to say union, but like force field to get created. This is something I'm quite fascinated by, but also the people themselves like go through a transformative process, like when you would kneel in a church, like you're doing something with, whereas like Margaret Mead also says, like what are these rituals that we do in Western modern societies where people just walk around a little bit like, you know, in a gallery or sit stiffly on chairs, you know. So that's a critique I have more of my own field, and I found things which I found personally more rich in the sports field, you know. But that comes after like, you know, showing many different continents, seeing different rituals, and I realized, like, I think for me a key thing was when I was in Senegal, and I was seeing these dance rituals, sabar. I don't know if anybody of you knows, but like worth checking out, you know, where mostly the women dance and they're kind of hanging almost in the air because they just touch the floor really shortly, and at the same time they're directing the men who are playing the music. And then I started going to my children's games, and I realized this feels similar. This is like a kind of the folklore in the positive sense of our region. Why should I mean, I like the folklore of another region, but I live here. And I started becoming interested in this kind of also, like the ties, the bonds that exist there. Bonds is the right word, you know? Like, you're, like when you said 37 years you're a Man United fan, that means you have a 37-year-old bond with this kind of abstract entity, you know? And that bond can easily be activated and not so easily undone, you know? And in art, like Kant talks about disinterestedness, which is like the opposite. You're not supposed to be connected to the object. You're supposed to, A, it's an object. It's not so easy to be connected to an object. B, you know, you're supposed to keep it at a distance to then judge it, you know? So these are the kind of the core aspects which I see in sports rituals, which like interest me and where I feel like more critical of like the so-called serious culture, for lack of a better word.
I have a quick question before the last one to him. What can you tell about the experience in the Galatasaray Stadium? What did you feel that day in that game where Nalin was with you?
I mean, it was, yeah, was a lot of energy, not only positive energies. I mean, one thing they do in Galatasaray, I assume they don't do it at Old Trafford, is when the opponents have the ball, they kind of whistle to a degree where I've never heard anything unamplified so loud in my life. And the other thing which remains in my, is a bit of a random thing, but there was one girl, I would say she was like 16, 17. She was like sitting maybe like, you know, 3 or 4 meters away from us, standing, and she was alone. She had sunglasses on, and she was screaming. And she was like getting upset at, I guess, your teammates, you know? And then she would fall kind of into silence again, and I again looked at her as this thing about the kneeling or about, you know, singing, you know, like a bodily movement where like in Western rational culture where these like serious culture formats like theater, museums belong to, like we want to put still in the body of the beholder. We don't want it to act out something, you know, where I thought, like, I looked at this girl and I could never do that, but I thought, she's going to feel different after this 90 minutes, you know? She's going to go home and, like, she's got she got something out, you know. I don't know if it's a good answer, but like, this is what I remember from that game.
But it's fascinating. I want to come back also to your question, right? Because the question with this, I love that idea with the 75,000 words. It's a really great idea, and that actually everybody would give a word, you'd have a book, And it actually made me think of something. My friend is Devlin, who is an artist and a designer, and she's very well known, among other things, for doing the stage design for The Weeknd, and she, for amazing pop music concerts. She did the recent concert also of Beyonce, which some of you, The Weeknd was in Manchester, and just very recently, and it's going to be in London now, and Beyonce I saw in London, I don't know if it was in Manchester, it was this gigantic screen, right, with a hole in between. It was basically a film screen, a moving image screen had a hole where people could, where the performers could enter, and they would permanently oscillate between 2D and 3D. And it's kind of interesting, kind of talking to us, when we started to work together, we did this thing about poetry, and in a quite similar way of connects to your idea, she thought, because she's used to work, similarly to football, with 50,000, 70,000 audiences at these pop concerts. And so she had this idea that she wanted to do a poem where everybody would contribute a word, and then you'd have this with AI, you'd have an infinite poem coming out. So there is something I think really interesting, which I've always been fascinated by, and which certainly is worthwhile further, investigation and research, what one could do actually to make this ritual in a stadium, at a pop concert or in a football stadium more participatory, And sometimes it does happen with pop concerts that, that people sing a song or whatever, but there could be, a collective work could come out of it. And I do think, talking to us, David, so just made me think, I think your point is a really interesting one, and we need to explore that further. We can take one last question, which was the one in the fourth row.
Hello, this question is mainly for Juan, so hola.
Hola.
So, arguably, the Trequartista is the most creative position in football. Now, in all the traditional forms of art, that could be theatre, songwriting, painting, drawing, poetry, it's well documented that you can express the full range of emotions. That could be love, hate, misery, jealousy, happiness, whatever. Do you feel that as a player, and particularly as a Trequartista number 10, that through playing football, you were able to express all of those emotions as if it were a traditional art form? Because I would say, as a fan, I can definitely express all of those emotions. What do you think? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just like that little girl in the stadium, she was expressing all her emotions. I think your question is very good, because I think I reach my best levels of playing when my mental state or my mood was ready for it. So the importance of how you feel inside your body, not only physically, but how do you feel with yourself, how do you feel with your life, how do you feel with everything around coming to that maybe specific season or game. Sometimes it's much more helpful than physically training a lot, right? So, and also the opposite. I have arrived to games feeling not so good, feeling responsibility or pressure or lack of confidence somehow. But then I played very good, I enjoyed so much, and after the game, I'm clear and I feel better with myself. So during the game, I felt relieved. So I express emotion mainly within myself, but I think that can get to people also. And I think you see from a fan point of view, if you love football, you can see when a player feels comfortable or not, confident or not. It feels that he belongs or she belongs to the team that she has, or he has a good relationship with everyone. I think you can feel that. It's a bit more difficult to communicate with the ball or with the pass than writing or singing or acting or talking to somebody, but I think you definitely can. And football, in the most difficult moments in my life, personally, football helped me to actually enjoy. For an hour and a half, for 2 hours of training, I didn't think about anything else. I could focus on that. I was flowing, and that state I really like. And that's the state I had when I was a kid and I played for 8 hours. I wanted to keep playing. So I think it can be healing in a way, sport in general, but in my case, football. And so, yeah, I think it can express some emotions through your game.
And that's beautiful because it goes full circle also back to art, because of course, as we know from, Hildegard from Bingen with her music, as we know from, Hilma af Klint, from Emma Kunst, art can also be really important in terms of healing. There could not be a more wonderful conclusion, I think. I'm so grateful to you all for being here. So grateful to Juan, so grateful to Tino. Please give them a big round of applause!